Hello and welcome to the Williston Development Review Board of March 14th, 2023. My name is Pete Kelly. I'm the chair of the DRB. If you are a Zoom participant, please sign in with your name on the participant toolbar. This is a hybrid meeting taking place in Town Hall and virtually on Zoom. All members of the board and public can communicate in real time. Planning staff will provide Zoom instructions. Okay, first up is the public forum. This is an opportunity for anyone to comment on items that are not on tonight's agenda. So if you're in the room or if you're participating by Zoom, raise your virtual hand. Is there anyone that would like to address the board at this time on topics not on tonight's agenda?
So far, I'm seeing no raised hands on Zoom or in the meeting room.
Okay, we now transition into the public hearing. We have Appeal 23-01, Mark Hall, Esquire, representing the appellants, Kim Butterfield and Ron Bliss, on the appeal of an administrative permit 23-0121 for a dog rescue home business at 170 Lamplite Lane in the residential zoning district. Who is present for the appellants?
Here, sir. Over here.
Yeah, there's two chairs at this table.
Okay.
And you can pull up a third if needed.
Right, you guys come on over. Okay. All set?
Okay, if you would please introduce yourself and your address for the record, please.
My name is Mark Hall. I'm an attorney at Paul Franklin Collins. The address, you mean where my home address?
Sure.
1 Church Street, P.O. Box 1307, Burlington, Vermont 05401. I'm an attorney for Kim Butterfield individually and a group of 16 people in the neighborhood relative to an application that was approved for a home occupation associated with a dog rescue. I submitted legal positions already.
Mark?
Yes.
Mark, this is strictly to identify yourself and your address. Who are the other two
Okay.
individuals?
Kim?
Kim Butterfield. I live at 403 White Birch Lane in Williston, Vermont, 0540495.
Ron Bliss, 285 Lamplite Lane in Williston.
Okay, so the sequence that we're going to do here is you will have your time, Mark.
fine.
Trust me.
Yeah.
The first up is staff to walk us through the staff report, please.
Okay, so this is an appeal of the zoning administrator's issuance of an administrative permit to operate a dog rescue home business at 170 Lamplight Lane in the residential zoning district. Per WDB 54 and as provided by 24 VSA 4465, any decision of the administrator may be appealed to the DRB. The DRB must hold a public hearing. Following the hearing, the DRB may uphold, modify, or overturn the decision of the administrator. In every case, the DRB shall adopt written findings and conclusions supporting its action. The DRB's decision on an appeal can be appealed to the Vermont Environmental Court as provided by 24 VSA 4471. Okay, so the subject property is 170 Lamplight Lane. It's in the residential zoning district. The residential dwelling has been in existence since about 1965. I've included a history of this appeal. In September of 2022, the zoning administrator issued a notice of zoning violation for the subject property. Shortly thereafter, Ms. Pederzani submitted an application for an administrative permit to resolve the zoning violation and establish a permit for a dog rescue home business. In November, the zoning administrator referred the administrative permit to the DRB. The DRB held a public hearing to review the project. The DRB deliberated and issued a decision denying the administrative permit for a dog rescue home business. In January of 2023, Ms. Pederzani submitted an application for an administrative permit to operate a scaled-down bulldog rescue home business. And also, Ms. Pederzani appealed the DRB decision to Vermont Environmental Court. On January 20th, 2023, the zoning administrator issued an administrative permit for the scaled-down bulldog rescue home business. And shortly thereafter, on February 1st, 2023, Ms. Pederzani withdrew the appeal to Vermont Environmental Court. On February 2nd, Mark Hall, Esquire, on behalf of appellants Kim Butterfield, Ron Bliss, and 16 residents of the Lamplite neighborhood, filed an appeal of the administrative permit issued to Donna Pederzani for a dog rescue home business. The administrator approved AP 230121 on January 20th, 2023. As part of the approval, the administrator included a letter enumerating his findings of fact, conclusions of law, and conditions of approval for the permit. The letter is attached to the staff report and referenced herein. The appellant's statement is attached and referenced herein. The appellants are appealing the decision of the administrator because they believe the permit was unlawfully issued and doesn't comply with the policies, purposes, or terms of the zoning bylaw. 4 comment letters were received at the time of packet mail out, and 3 additional comment letters have been received as of today. A legal opinion has not been obtained as part of this review. So I will just now go through the appellant's statement point by point, and basically like state what, what I think is pertinent to those statements, and what the bylaw says in relationship to those statements. And then I will point out what the DRB's action is to discuss and make a decision about each of those statements. So the first statement is that Ms. Pederzani previously applied for and was denied a discretionary permit to operate her dog rescue. Vermont law prohibits the filing of successive zoning applications, and the business has not changed substantially so as to respond to the objections of the original application. Therefore, the application shouldn't have been considered, let alone granted. Staff notes that Vermont law does prohibit applicants from making successive appeals of a DRB decision, essentially applying over and over for the same thing despite a denial. An application for a dog rescue at this address, AP 230062, was denied by the DRB in November of 2022. I have included a table that illustrate the differences between the previously submitted application for home business and the subsequent application, which is the subject of this appeal. So the previous application, there were 6 kennels that were placed within the subject property's backyard for use by the home business. In this application, the use of the backyard kennels for the home business has been discontinued. In the previous application, daily visits to the home business by 3 to 6 volunteers each morning and afternoon, and hours, details about hours were not provided. This application states that a maximum of 2 volunteers are at the home business during the hours of 7 to 8 a.m. and 3 to 4 p.m. daily, and the applicant has stated that no PM peak hour trips are generated. Most notably, the previous application included transport days where a large number of dogs are delivered to the property, and adopters of those dogs arrive sometimes at the same time or on the same day to pick up the dogs. In this application, adoptions now occur off-site, eliminating the transport days on the site. The previous application didn't give details about the use of the backyard. Public testimony does indicate that the backyard, that dogs were let out in the backyard, not always supervised. In this application, the backyard is proposed to be used from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. for one dog at a time, supervised by one volunteer. Previously, multiple dogs were walked in the neighborhood during morning and afternoon shifts. This application states that one dog at a time is walked on leash in the neighborhood during each shift, as well as taking dogs off-site on field trips. So the DRB should discuss and decide whether the changes made to this home business operation are significant enough to make it a new and substantially different application than the one that was previously denied by the DRB. I'll move on to the second statement of the appellants. Even if this application could be considered, Ms. Pederzani is running a kennel for commercial purposes, whether a nonprofit or not. Williston zoning bylaw 20.4.1 requires a discretionary permit for all home businesses that have more than one non-resident employee or generate more than 1 p.m. peak hour trip. Currently, Ms. Pederzani has more than one dog walker at the property at some point during the day, and the activity appears to involve more than 1 p.m. peak hour trip. The zoning administrator, therefore, had no authority to grant an administrative permit. Instead, it should have been referred to the Development Review Board for a hearing on a discretionary permit, just as it was the first time. So the DRB should consider whether the home business, as described by the applicant, exceeds the thresholds established under WDB 20.4.3, namely, a discretionary permit is required for any home business proposed in a 2-household dwelling that will include the overnight parking of a commercial vehicle or any customer or client traffic. A discretionary permit is required for all home businesses that propose to have more than one non-resident employee on site or generate more than 1 p.m. peak hour trip. So the DRB should consider whether it agrees with the zoning administrator's findings of fact pursuant to WDB 20.4.3. So the home business proposed by the application or in the application is a 1-household dwelling, and there's no arguing about that, really. The proposed home business will not have more than one non-resident employee. So this finding of fact relies on a literal interpretation of employee. The plain language, the WDB does not define employee. The plain language definition is one employed by another, usually for wages or salary, and in a position below the executive level. So given that the requirement that the bylaws be administered literally, the zoning administrator made a finding that the business will not have more than one non-resident employee because the volunteers are not paid for their work. The staff report for the previous home business application, AP 230062, does treat the volunteers as employees for the purposes of administering the bylaw. So I'm noting that the plain language definition of employee doesn't have an absolute requirement for an employee to be paid. It says one employed by another, usually for wages or salary. So staff is recommending that the volunteers in this case can be considered the same as employees for the purposes of administering the bylaw. The DRB should discuss this and decide whether it agrees with finding of fact, with the administrator's finding of fact. Are volunteers the same as employees? The third finding of fact, the proposed home business will not generate more than 1 PM peak hour trip end. It relies on a literal definition of PM peak hour trip end as trips that occur between the hours of 4 PM and 6 PM on weekdays. And because evening volunteers will be on site between 3 and 4 PM, the zoning administrator finds that no PM peak hour trips will be generated by the business. So the DRB should discuss and decide whether it agrees with this. Will the business generate more than 1 PM peak hour trip? So if the DRB disagrees with any finding of fact related to the WDB 20.4.3, the thresholds for DRB review of home businesses, then it must find the zoning administrator did not have the authority to issue the home business permit administratively, but that the application should have been referred to the DRB for a discretionary permit. The next statement, 3A, the appellate statement reads, even if the application can be considered, it does not comply with either WDB 20.4.3 or Appendix G of the bylaws which govern home occupations. The kennels in the RZD, the dogs are walked in the backyard and in the surrounding neighborhood by one or more volunteers under requirements for home businesses set out in Appendix G of the bylaw. The use shall be entirely within the dwelling or accessory structure, and outdoor workspaces associated with the home business are prohibited in the RZD. Ms. Pederzani uses the property outside the dwelling as an outdoor workspace for dog walking and other kennel-related activities which are expressly prohibited in the RZD. So I will note that per WDB 20.9.1, kennels used for commercial purposes, including boarding and breeding, may be permitted as a home business. The zoning administrator's conclusions of law were that the use of the residential backyard for 1 dog at a time, supervised by 1 volunteer, limited to 1 hour per day between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., does not cause the backyard to be an outdoor workspace as the term is used in Appendix G3. The bylaw does not define outdoor workspace. Appendix G states, in the RZD, MURZD, and VZD zoning districts, the space used for the proposed home business shall be within the dwelling or in an accessory structure that complies with all requirements of this bylaw. Outdoor workspaces and the outdoor storage of materials, supplies, equipment, vehicles, or goods for sale are prohibited in the RZD, MURZD, and VZD. So the DRB should discuss and decide whether it agrees with the administrator's conclusions of law stated above regarding outdoor workspaces. Staff is recommending that in making this determination, the DRB should consider the intensity of the proposed home business activity in comparison with customary uses of backyards. If the DRB finds that the use of the residential backyard for 1 dog at a time, supervised by 1 volunteer, limited to 1 hour per day between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., does constitute an outdoor workspace, it can either deny the permit or establish a condition prohibiting any use of outdoor areas on the subject property. Staff notes that dog walking in the public right-of-ways is allowed and cannot be regulated by the DRB through permit conditions. So, moving on to statement 3B, appellant statement reads, Ms. Pederzani has no parking sufficient for her volunteers or any visitors. Parking for the home business under such circumstances is required in the RZD. Appendix G states that off-street parking must be provided at a rate determined by the administrator or the DRB. The administrator made a determination that 3 off-street parking spaces are required. 2 spaces are provided in the driveway, and the zoning administrator required an additional formal parking space to be delineated in the side yard for the work vehicle within 6 months of issuing the permit. The prior application for the rescue was submitted at a time when the applicant was using the home for much larger adoption events called transfers, which the applicant is specifically not proposing to conduct on site under this new application. Adoption events will take place off-site as described in the home business plan. Adoption events which brought large numbers of people to the subject property and generated a need for parking are no longer being held on site. Without these events, there are few to no visitors associated with the home business and a maximum of 2 volunteers during the chore times of 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. The volunteers generate a need for 2 parking spaces, which can be accommodated in the driveway. Staff is recommending that there is adequate parking provided on-site for the home business. Staff also notes that on-street parking is allowed as long as it's not impeding the flow of traffic or blocking a driveway and cannot be regulated by the DRB through permit conditions. So the DRB should discuss and decide whether the on-site parking as conditioned in the approval for AP 230121 is compliant with the requirements under the WDB 20.4 and Appendix G. If the DRB decides the provision of parking is inadequate for the home business, it can either deny the permit or draft a condition establishing a required number of parking spaces it deems adequate. Moving on to statement number 3C. The appellate statement reads, upon information, belief, and experience, the kennel generates more than 1 p.m. peak hour trip per day. Trips to the RZD for home business are strictly limited to 1 vehicle in the PM peak. As stated in the zoning administrator's letter, the applicant's home business plan notes that volunteer visits will be the only regular traffic to and from the property not generated by the applicant themselves. The home business plan states that no trips will be generated during the PM peak. This element of this application is substantially different from the application that was denied by the DRB because no transport days or adoption events are proposed to take place at the home business. These will take place off-site as described in the home business plan. Staff notes that the PM peak hour for single-family residential uses is specifically defined in the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual as between 4 and 6 p.m. The applicant has stated the business will generate no PM peak hour trips. However, if volunteers are expected to work from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m., then they are leaving the site after 4 p.m. and potentially generating traffic during the PM peak hour. I will add that having looked at one of the comment letters that came in today, there's a log of volunteer hours, and it appears that the volunteers are leaving no later than 3:45 in the afternoon. So if the DRB were to establish a condition requiring earlier volunteer hours, I don't think it would negatively impact the home business. So the DRB should discuss this, decide whether the home business generates more than 1 p.m. peak hour trip, and if so, discuss whether and how to modify the conditions of approval. The DRB can permit an exception to allow additional trips if it finds traffic flow from the proposed home business will not have an adverse impact on neighboring homes. Or like I said, it could just modify the conditions of approval to require the afternoon short time to end by 3:45 p.m. Moving on to statement 3D, the applicant's statement reads, Appendix G requires compliance with Chapter 18 of the bylaws. Chapter 18 prohibits activities that are a nuisance. The presence of the commercial kennel in a residential neighborhood is a nuisance. As an initial matter, if an activity represents a potential nuisance, it should be referred to the Development Review Board for a discretionary permit. Based on past and current experiences, this activity results in smells from the trash bins, noise from barking dogs, and traffic from volunteers and visitors, which in the context of a residential neighborhood is a nuisance, and this is not expected to change. The zoning administrator letter states that the applicant has, in their proposed business plan, stated that 1 volunteer and 1 dog will go outside to the backyard at a time, only between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 a.m. And the WDB 18 and the Williston noise ordinance allow for limits to be exceeded no more than 10 minutes out of a given hour. So the zoning administrator finds that approving the home business is unlikely to result in approval of a development that will exceed the limits of the Williston noise ordinance. The zoning administrator's approval doesn't mention the potential nuisance related to smells from the trash bins, but the applicant's narrative does. The applicant's narrative describes how they manage trash. They have a trash shed that houses the household recycling trash, and the recycling and trash for the rescue. Dog waste is bagged in wood shavings. The applicant goes to the Redmond Road Transfer Facility 2 to 3 times per week. So the applicant has taken steps to mitigate both noise and odors resulting from the home business. And the condition drafted in the zoning administrator's approval to move the solid waste disposal shed outside of all setbacks should further mitigate odors drifting onto abutting properties. And also, I will note that Appendix G6, which addresses potential nuisances generated by home businesses, does not mention odors. So DRB should consider the matter of noise and discuss whether this home business, as described, would be expected to exceed the limits of the Williston noise ordinance. DRB should consider the matter of odors and discuss whether this home business, as described, would be expected to produce odors that are not confined to the subject property and/or are not adequately mitigated by the applicant. So in conclusion, staff's recommending the DRB discuss each point raised by the appellants and make a decision to uphold, modify, or overturn the zoning administrator's decision regarding each point. Staff notes that none of the issues raised by the appellants require this application to be denied, and is recommending that where there are conflicts with the bylaw, these conflicts can be resolved by modifying conditions of approval. So I've included some conditions, conclusions of law and proposed motions, which you will need to modify according to what decisions you make. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Melinda. Good job. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the appellants now. I assume, Mr. Hall, you're going to speak?
Yes, just briefly, I think that the presentation covers everything we submitted accurately and well. I have some disagreements with it. The problem overall for the people I represent are the outside activities in the neighborhood. We think that they are much more intensive than are represented. But in any case, if you look at the ordinance, and this is what I'm focused on right now, is the Appendix G of the bylaw says very specifically, the use shall be entirely within the dwelling and a home occupation in this district. There's no exception to that language. There's no looking at it and say, well, that's not that much. It's within the dwelling. Obviously, in a residential neighborhood, the purpose of the ordinance is to provide people to have an occupation at home, which is allowed by statute, but to limit it to things such as internet business or on the home business, and not to move the operation or significant parts of the operation to move to the exterior of the building. In this case, I think that walking the dogs that are kept on site, the outside of the external outside of the building is integral to the business itself. It cannot function without that. I don't think it matters whether it's up and down the street or in the backyard or in the front yard. The question is the business can't go outside the dwelling. So I do strongly disagree with the notion that once you get on the public land on a sidewalk, that suddenly this provision doesn't apply. If you're in a neighborhood, you're outside the dwelling with your business. And in this case, I don't think you can get past this in this circumstance. And this is why the neighbors are upset with this use being in the neighborhood. It's not the fact that there's a home occupation. It's not the nature, the business of rescue. It's the outside activities associated with the dogs and the volunteers and people coming to the property, what we believe is a much more intensive level than is being represented. Under those circumstances, we go right to the ordinance. It's very specific with residential zones. If you're going to have a home occupation, it stays in your house, period. There's not a 1 hour exception for the backyard. There's not an exception for walking up and down the sidewalk. It's clear as a bell. But, that's all I have to say. Put it in writing. I don't need to go over and over it again. What I do have is people here, Kim and Ron, to explain to you what they see in responding to the application and the staff note. So, Ron or Kim, which one do you want to go?
I'm going to go first if you want.
We do have a written document for the speech, but I'll leave with the zoning administrator so you have something, so you don't have to go back and look at the the hearing in the future. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Ron Bliss again, from 285 Lamplite Lane. We come before you this evening speaking on behalf of the 16 neighbors of Lamplite Acres who oppose the administrative permit issued to the Vermont English Bulldog Rescue located at 170 Lamplite Lane by the Williston zoning administrator. Our testimony will address the approval of home business permit AP 230121, approved administratively by the zoning administrator. Our comments will relate to the selected items of the conclusion of law found in the staff notes of this permit. Our concern with this business is the outside activity associated with the business in our neighborhood. It is not with the business activity inside the house or what occurs in remote locations. We are not against the dog rescue. The outside activity at the dog rescue affects the character of our neighborhood. It affects the quality of life in our neighborhood. And I would like to take a moment to explain the outdoor activity that occurs at the rescue, which involves frequent deliveries of 4 to 10 dogs, who are maintained on the property by staff or workers who utilize the yards in the neighborhood for care of the dogs until they are acquired by their new owners. All these activities occur externally to the house. With respect to the dog delivery, the town had the rescue move the initial delivery to an off-site location at the Masonic Temple building to prevent disruption in the neighborhood. However, the problems associated with the delivery did not go away. The day prior, the day of, and the day after the delivery brings a flurry of activity. Several workers arrive the day prior to the delivery. A rental van is loaded and moves items to facilitate the delivery to the off-site location. On the days of the remote delivery, the workers are in and out of the rescue. Dogs not immediately adopted or picked up by their adopters at the remote site are delivered to the house by the workers, which can involve 4 to 6 dogs every few weeks. Importantly, the change in the delivery to an off-site occurrence prior to the original permit hearing application. Assuming this activity was taken care of, the first and second zoning permits were reviewed without considering the impacts of the dog delivery and related activities that still occur at the residence. The unclaimed dogs are delivered to the house with the same flurry of activity happening. All the dogs need exercise, which occurs on the property and throughout the neighborhood when they arrive. Once the dogs are at the house, the rescue operates 7 days a week. In the morning, 1 or 2 workers arrive to care for the dogs, and in the afternoon, another 1 or 2 workers arrive to care for the dogs. Each time they arrive to care for the dogs are either taken in the backyard for 10 to 15 minutes and are walked in the neighborhood. Obviously, the operation is 100% reliant on the use of outside areas on the property and in the neighborhood and is not constrained to the dwelling only. Over the next 10 to 14 days after the delivery to the house, adopters randomly arrive to complete paperwork and meet the dog. Most adopters show up with several people to meet the new addition to their family. The introductory meeting occurs outside in the front yard, side yard, backyard, or in the neighborhood streets. This practice, as stated above, has been up to and including yesterday, Monday the 13th. The remainder of our testimony will be brief comments related to the conclusions of law and the staff notes. Regarding conclusion of law number 2, the applicant submitted does not represent a significant change from the application previously submitted for home business. Elements in the current application do not represent a significant change from the first permit, including the use of 1 or more volunteer workers arriving to do the work of the rescue. PM peak hours. There continues to be traffic during the peak hours for both workers arriving and departing and customer traffic of persons coming to the rescue to adopt a dog. The use of outdoor spaces, the backyard, front yard, and the streets in the neighborhood for walking dogs and processing adoptions with the adopters. The items involving volunteers, employees, PM peak hours, trips, customer traffic each require a discretionary review by the DRB. Since the second permit is clearly not substantially different from the first and by ordinance and state law, we would ask that permit 23-121 be vacated as it is the same as 23-0062. We will discuss each of these points and show they are not substantially different from the first permit. Conclusion of law number 3, the proposed home business cannot be reviewed as administratively, thus a discretionary permit review is required by the DRB. In WDB 20.4 states, a discretionary permit is required for all home businesses that propose to have more than one non-resident employee. Even though the workers who come to this rescue on a daily basis are not paid, they are engaged in the necessary work for caring of the dogs. They should be considered an employee. This is clear contradiction by the zoning administrator on this point between the first application and the second as to whether the rescue workers are employees. He changed his mind. The home business ordinance is directed at regulating and accounting for non-resident persons coming into the residential neighborhood to work at a commercial business. It doesn't make any difference whether they are paid or not, they are generating traffic. WD 20.4 also states that discretionary permit is required for all businesses that generate more than one PM peak hour trip. The second dog rescue application was permitted by the zoning administrator based on an altered schedule when the afternoon work period ended before 4 p.m. Based on ongoing observation, the rescue has not consistently maintained the schedule. There have been multiple instances of workers leaving after 4. In fact, workers sometimes don't even arrive until after 4. Also, the zoning administrator did not account for the traffic generated by adopters coming to the rescue. The off-site dog deliveries have been occurring every 3 weeks, and these deliveries, multiple dogs, typically 4 to 10, are brought back to the rescue where they are kenneled until people adopt them. These adoptions happen at the rescue, many of them after 4 p.m. Given the number of dogs being adopted at the rescue, many PM peak hours have occurred in violation of the issued permit. In the home business plan, the application acknowledges in item 7 that the dogs are brought back to the dwelling until adopters can come to complete their transactions for the dogs days after the transport event. In the first application, the zoning administrator determined it is the position of the staff that these events exceed what can generate a permit of a home business under zoning. Zoning permission of transport day operation is not part of any draft set of conditions or approval provided in the staff report. In the findings of the second permit, this element of this application is substantially different from the application that was denied by the DRB because no transport days or adoption events are proposed to take place at the home business. These will take place off-site as described in the proposed home business. This is not correct. Transfer days are not considered as part of the DRB approval process for the first application. This is not a substantial difference between the two permits. Given that there are multiple employees working in the rescue and the PM peak trips are frequently generated by both employees and adopters, the application should not have been approved administratively. It is important to note that in the first permit, the zoning administrator wrote in the staff notes, the dog rescue operation includes customer or client traffic, where a person wishes to adopt an animal to do so by visiting the residence. Since these elements require a discretionary permit review or are substantially similar to the first permit, per se law, this cannot happen.
Hello, I'm Kim Butterfield, and I will speak to the conclusions of law, numbers 4 through 7, on page 8 of the staff report. Regarding conclusion of law, number 4, any use of outside workspaces by the dog rescue is prohibited by the home business ordinance. Appendix G clearly states, in the residential zoning district, the space used for the proposed home business shall be within the dwelling, and outdoor workspaces and the outdoor storage of materials, supplies, equipment, vehicles, or goods for sale are prohibited in the RZD. The business uses outdoor space every day, in the morning and in the afternoon. Workers take dogs out to walk in the front yard, around the neighborhood or in the backyard, both in the morning and afternoon. The zoning administrator allowed for one dog at a time, supervised by one worker, to be in the backyard between the hours of 7 and 8 a.m. Dogs are also brought to the backyard on a daily basis during the afternoon, 3 to 4 p.m. work period, which is not allowed in the permit. There have been multiple occasions where more than one dog and more than one volunteer are observed in the front yard and entering the backyard. For example, after the double dog deliveries on January 21st and 22nd, 10 dogs were brought back to the rescue, 8 of them puppies. Rescue workers were seen carrying puppies 2 at a time into the backyard, both morning and afternoon, over the course of a week. The numerous adopters who are purchasing these dogs come to the rescue, meet with dogs outside, and sometimes will complete adoption paperwork in the front yard. There have been anywhere from 6 to 10 dogs that are brought back from delivery events to the rescue where the adoption transactions happen. This can involve multiple people outside in the yard at the rescue, and sometimes multiple dogs. The rescue Facebook page has pictures from at least 10 separate adoptions that have occurred at the rescue dwelling both inside and outside. For example, on January 31st, 2 people were observed arriving at the rescue after 4:30 p.m. with their 2 personal dogs to meet with a non-resident worker who introduced them to 2 different rescue dogs in the backyard. During this 40-minute time period, dogs could be heard barking in the backyard. This particular meetup involved 2 vehicles parked at the rescue during PM peak trip hours. Regarding the original application, the zoning administrator stated the yard around the kennels may not be used as an outdoor workspace. In the second or current application, he reversed himself, now allowing the backyard to be used as outdoor workspaces for both adoptions and exercising dogs. The use of the open front yard, as well as the frequent outside activity generated by adoptions at the rescue, was not addressed at all. The ordinance is clear on this point. A home business should be within the dwelling. This commercial business does not comply with the home business ordinance as stated in Appendix G. Regarding conclusion of law number 5, the 3 proposed parking spaces required as a condition of approval for this permit are not adequate to serve the needs of both the business and the residents. When addressing the second application, the zoning administrator stated that the proposed home business requires 3 parking spaces in addition to spaces needed for the residential use. This would be a total of 4 spaces. Later in the same document, in the decision for the permit, the zoning administrator required only 3 off-street parking spaces, noting that 1 was for the vehicle belonging to the residents. There is not adequate parking for the business. The lack of sufficient off-street parking for the workers and adopters coming to the home forces on-street parking at a busy intersection at the entrance of the neighborhood. There are often several rescue-related cars parked on the street, creating safety issues at this location where neighbors and children actively walk and bike on the street. Cars parked there create congestion as cars and school buses are trying to turn or move through the intersection. When it snows, plows need to clean around the parked cars, leaving a large portion of the intersection unplowed. The permitted home business plan states under item 7 that the police advise that parking on public roads is okay. This is true in a broad sense. However, the police do not enforce zoning decisions. In summary of number 5, the DRB's decision regarding the first application concluded that The movement and street parking of volunteer vehicles on Lamplite Lane at the subject property creates congestion on the street. This still applies. Number 6, with regard to conclusion of law number 6, the home business often generates more than one PM peak hour trip. This has been addressed by Ron previously as part of conclusion of law number 3, part C. Conclusion of law number 7. The presence of this home business in our residential neighborhood is a nuisance. While noise from barking typically decreases in the winter months, there have been continuing instances where several dogs have been brought to the backyard for the morning and afternoon dog care, resulting in significant barking. At other times, multiple dogs are outside for a meet and greet between adopters' dogs and a dog being considered for adoption, also resulting in excessive barking. If this continues into the late spring and summer, the noise will rise to the level of nuisance. The odor issue was seemingly addressed in the permit by requiring the removal of the trash holding structure to a location outside of the required setback. This has not yet happened. The trash structure is still against the fence, bordering the side property line. It is less than 30 feet from the neighboring house, and it's near a bedroom window. There is a concern with continued noxious odors being evident even if it is moved.
We have presented evidence that the application submitted has not substantially changed from the application previously submitted for a home business. There is more than one worker doing the work of the rescue, more than 1 PM peak trips occurring. There is customer traffic at the rescue to adopt dogs, and there is a prohibited use of outdoor space by the home business. The items involving volunteers, employees, PM peak hour trips, the customer traffic, each require a discretionary review by the DRB. The use of the outdoor spaces is expressly prohibited in the town ordinance. State law prohibits a second review of the same permit by the DRB. We would ask that this permit be vacated. It is the same permit as 230062. The use of outdoor spaces in a home business in the RZD zone is prohibited by the town ordinance. Allowing such in this case could set a precedent for future home business applications in town. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. DRB members, questions?
Hey guys.
Any questions?
Any questions from the DRB?
I've got one. You mentioned the parking situation. If the parking situation was corrected, would this still be a nuisance? Would we still have the same problem?
I think if the proper spaces were off the street, no.
Okay.
No,
And if it was maintained that way.
and it doesn't violate the BMP issue.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Volunteers, if they're bitten by a dog, are they covered by the rescue, or would they actually have to sue the rescue?
Paul, who's that question for? The appellants?
Oh, pass that on.
That's the problem I'm having here, is that we're being invited to ask questions of the appellants, but probably most of our questions are for the dog owner. So that's why, Pete, I'm not coming up with a lot of questions right off here. I think the appellants made a clear presentation. Thank you for that. Don't necessarily agree with everything you say, but I appreciate the way that you presented it.
Well, we can have we can certainly hear from the business owner, and we can ask questions. Is the business owner present?
Yes, Donna is here.
Okay.
Donna,
So why don't we exhaust any questions that we have for the appellants, and then we can ask Donna to come up and field questions from the DRB. So are there any other questions for the appellants?
None here, Pete.
Okay,
I
hearing
don't know.
none.
What about Lisa?
Lisa, are you good?
Yeah, I'm good. Sorry, I had
Okay.
to sort out how to unmute there. Yeah, I'm good.
Okay, no problem. Okay, Donna, would you please come forth to an adjacent, I'm a little handcuffed because I'm not there, but come forward to the testimony table and state your name and address for the record, please.
Sure. Donna Pederzani, 170 Lamplite Lane, Williston.
Thank you. DRB, questions, please.
One question is they brought up the concern of people coming after hours to finalize the transactions of the adoptions. Is that happening currently, or do you have that occurring at the offsite location?
So what I will say, so first I want to say that I submitted a legal memorandum answering each of the issues that the appellants have raised. And I could keep you here all night going through 52 pages. I don't really want to do that. But I do want to touch on what's relevant. What frankly surprises me is the amount of assumption that is being made here, because these are people who have now and never any conversations with me about any of their complaints. I know that we're being filmed constantly, which is just beyond intrusive.
No, that's actually legal.
But I'm saying it's intrusive. If you know.
Not if you're running a business, it's legal.
But not.
Move on.
Not 24/7.
Yeah.
That they would have no way of knowing what is going on at my house, who is a visitor, who might actually be a caseworker for my daughter from the Howard Center, who might be someone that's a delivery person. The assumption is that every car that pulls into my yard is someone associated with the rescue. They would have no way of knowing that. They would have no way of knowing that I am conducting an adoption at the house unless they are standing there with me. We do not use the front yard. In fact, the front yard is not even walkable for a human, let alone a human with a dog. My job, if you want to call it a job, running a nonprofit dog rescue, is that I foster the dogs for the rescue. It is not a commercial business, and I can read the definition of a commercial business, which is defined as relating to or connected with trade, traffic, or commerce in general. And commerce defined as the exchange or buying and selling of goods, productions, or properties. We do not buy and sell anything. I've submitted as one point of reference our latest, last year, 2021, tax returns that are itemized page by page that show that there is not income derived from the rescue. And yet we're being referred to as a commercial business. We are not a commercial business. We are a nonprofit. Our volunteers are being referred to as employees. And again, if you go to the definition, which might take me a moment to find, the definition of, so one cannot, and this is in my paperwork, one cannot simultaneously be an employee and a volunteer. An employee is someone who is paid to work. That is right out of Webster's dictionary. A volunteer is a person who undertakes tasks or services of his own free will without consideration in the form of any monetary compensation. The appellants have described in their report and confirms that they describe the people coming and going as volunteers. And yet they want to present it that's interchangeable. Well, they're a volunteer, but they're an employee. They are not an employee. They do not get any compensation for what they do. I feel like I got a bit off track from your question, so can you remind me what that was?
Do you have people show up on your property to view the dogs or finalize the adoption papers and stuff after 4 p.m.?
No. And in fact, submitted again as a piece of evidence are 3 months of volunteer logs that show dates, times, names, so that volunteers can be contacted, when they arrived, when they signed out, what they did while they were there. This has been so scaled back. So I want to focus on your question, which is, do people come after 4 o'clock? People come to my house after 4 o'clock.
For the adoption purposes?
No.
Or to visit the dogs too?
No, absolutely not.
So everything for dog-related activities is done
3:45.
prior to 4 o'clock?
So we say 3 to 4 as that afternoon window. 3:45, if you look at the logs, and sometimes it's earlier than that. And I want to explain why that is. Previously, transports came to the house, dogs stayed at the house and were adopted out over a period of weeks. When we changed everything back in November, and that was done partly to address the complaints of the neighborhood, which I knew nothing about until October, I think. I went through and looked at all of the complaints and said, okay, I get it, traffic, people, how do we address this? We moved all of the transports off-site to the Masonic Hall in Williston. Our transports, and I'm hearing what was said in testimony before, we do not take transports of dogs to my property, and we have not since November of last year. But again, if they see a rental van, oh my God, it must be a dog delivery. We don't deliver dogs in rental vans. We might move, I don't know, what would we move? One of my volunteers that is here helps with setup at the Masonic Hall. So we rent the U-Haul truck the night before. We have to put it somewhere. Sometimes it's at my house. Usually it's left at, we do the setup and it's at the Masonic Hall for the entire weekend. But he may drive back and forth to drop something off, to pick up bedding, to pick up towels, to pick up food, to pick up something that we need over at the hall. But it is not a constant back and forth. It is not dogs being delivered and dropped off. The dogs that are at the house now are dogs that are all undergoing medical treatment. And this is something that Matt and I talked about when I submitted the permit. I have 2 dogs, for instance, that are undergoing heartworm treatment. That's something that takes months. It's a month of antibiotic, and then it's shots, and then a month later, again shots, and a month later, again shots. Those are not dogs that I am going to adopt out until they've gone through all of their medical treatment. So they are with me, and I am fostering them. And that is no different than, well, I was going to say my next door neighbor, but that is no different than one of my volunteers, for instance, taking home a dog that is legally owned by the rescue and fostering it through to adoption. It's no different than folks for All Breed Rescue fostering dogs, or Passion for Paws fostering dogs. That's how we all do it. We have fosters that take our dogs. But if it's a medical dog and it needs a lot of supervision, I typically will keep it so that I can be responsible for that. When they talk about these dogs going in and out, being dropped off, adopted constantly, trafficked, again, there is no way for someone who isn't directly involved to discern who is a visitor, who is a volunteer, there was a day when Matt stopped by to put up a sign for the hearing. I'm sure that there are pictures of his car in the driveway, and I'm sure that somebody thought it was a volunteer, because that's the kind of scrutiny that I am under all the time. And that's just simply not fair. That is not fair scrutiny. I want to go back to one of the points that was kind of beaten into the ground about whether I should have been allowed to submit a second permit. And again, in the documents that I submitted it with supporting legal documentation, cases in Vermont that support what I'm saying, which is a second or successive application may be entertained provided there is a substantial change of conditions or other considerations materially affecting the merits of the request. It is not necessary for an applicant to change or remedy every condition or every objection existing in the first application for a second application to be considered. One change in conditions is all that is required to be sufficient to allow the consideration of a second application. It's right in Vermont law. I didn't have to change 6 things, which is what I did. I only had to change 1. And so when Attorney Hall says this isn't a substantial change, this is a monumental change, no transports to the house, limiting our chore time. There are no peak trips, because if we end at 3:45, they are on the road and gone by the 4 o'clock peak hour. We don't house transport loads of dogs. We don't use the outdoor enclosures to hold dogs. In fact, part of the revised permit application was that I would remove some of the outdoor enclosures because, frankly, I don't need them, but they're frozen in the ground. And so in the spring, and Matt, in his approval, gave a 6-month window to meet the conditions that he put on the second permit. The enclosures will be removed. There are no dogs that are housed in those outdoor enclosures at all, ever. There are not. We are simply not using them. And I don't know who has a dog that when it's running loose in the backyard is barking, but mine don't, because they're actually pretty happy running around, chasing toys, having a volunteer play with them. So this assertion that we still have dogs barking, I went so far as to do a noise study because I thought, okay, I'm going to really look at this, and it's in my paperwork. I did measurements using the town map from my property to each of the appellant properties in the neighborhood, and if you look at it, you can see it. It's very specific. It talks about the sound at the time it leaves my property, specifically a dog bark, at its loudest, and where that dog bark is when it lands at whoever, pick any one of the 16. And to say that the sound reading when it lands at any of these properties within a certain amount of time is, I would say, almost laughable. I have dogs across the street from me, 2 black labs that don't even go out in public because they're so vicious. When those 2 dogs are in their yard, it sounds like someone is being murdered, and I'm not exaggerating. Mr. and Mrs. Canfer live 50 feet from this house. Do they complain about those dogs who scare me so much that I go out of my house to make sure someone isn't being killed? No complaints there. But my yard, where there are no dogs, what I will point out is that in 12 years, there has never been a noise complaint. against the rescue, never. There is no police record of any kind of complaint about the rescue. If we were doing things so badly and so intrusive and so offensive, where are the police reports? Where are the health?
So Donna, do you feel like it's reasonable of your neighbors to perceive the activities that have supported this rescue over the years as a nuisance?
Can you say it again?
Do you feel like it's reasonable that your neighbors perceive the activities supporting your rescue as a nuisance?
Well, are you talking about over the years, or are you talking about since we?
I'm talking about over the years, and then after we can get into what's.
So I would say no, because 5 of the appellants have adopted dogs from us. So how do you come into my yard and adopt a dog from me and tell me thank you for what you do? It's amazing. And walk by my house with those dogs every day and then tell me it's a nuisance.
Okay.
If you want to talk about double dipping, I mean, that's.
What's been the growth from the beginning till now?
So
What were your counts when you started?
So I actually looked at the numbers because I have to for my taxes. So when we first started out, we were doing somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 dogs a year. Last year, which is the year that the appellant said was our worst year, we had just grown exponentially. The numbers were 260, which was 100 dogs less than the year before. So it varies. The goal is not a number chasing thing. The goal is to save dogs. And so no, I do not feel that it is fair. What I feel would be fair, and what I would do as a neighbor, although boy, I use that term loosely now, I would call someone up on the phone. If I was walking by the house with the dog that I adopted from them 2-3 times a week, and they were bringing the dog over and I was holding it and loving on it and talking about how great it was, I would say, hey, can I talk to you about some issues I have with you? There's some stuff bothering me. Can we sit down and talk about it?
Could you walk us through now with the Masonic Center where you do your transports, which from your testimony last time, you told us there's between 20 and 30 dogs sometimes on a transport. What happens when the truck gets there with the dogs? What happens from that point on? Are 20 adopters meeting you at the Masonic Center and driving away with the dogs?
So you sound kind of incredulous when you said that. So the weeks between transports, there's typically 1 transport a month. The weeks between transports, people are, excuse me, people are filling out applications and I'm screening them. And I'm matching or pre-matching as best I can a family with a dog. So what does pre-matching mean? With, I think, All Breed Rescue, it was almost.
What I'm concerned with is at the Masonic Center, when the transport arrives, logistically, what is happening from that point on? Not before, not leading up to it. What is happening at that point?
Well, I'm just trying to tell you how people get there. So,
I'm not interested in that.
We'd like to hear
So-
just the answers to the questions.
so the truck, I'm not sure I understand. The truck.
I'd like to
drives-
know the truck arrives with
truck
20 to 30 dogs
arrives.
on it, and then what happens at that
The
point?
night before, volunteers have set up the hall with enclosures that the dogs go into. So the dogs come off the transport and not 30, 15 to 20, go into the Masonic Hall, they go in, they get walked, they get watered, they get fed, they go into their enclosures, and they wait for people to come for their pre-assigned appointments. They're 1-hour appointments set up throughout the day, typically starting between 10 and 3, and that can vary some.
So that all happens in one day? The
That all
dogs
happens-
the dogs never spend the night there, correct?
Oh, no.
Okay.
No, the dogs go to their adoptive homes
And-
that day.
And part of the adoption fees that you charge cover deworming, injections, microchipping. How is that being done if the animals are being picked up right after they're off of the transport?
We don't bring any dogs into the state that are not fully medically updated. So I pull almost exclusively out of San Antonio, Texas. So they are spayed, neutered, fully vaccinated, not just a rabies, which is what a lot of rescues do. They're fully vaccinated, as I would vaccinate my own personal dog. They're microchipped. If they had had any medical condition, whatever, they're treated in Texas and they stay there until they're cleared by our vets and given an interstate health certificate. Every dog has to go through an exam prior to transport that clears them for transport, and that means clears them of infectious, contagious, and communicable diseases, that reviews their vet record, that turns them away if they have so much as a sniffle.
Great. So getting back to Nate's question.
They go that day.
So getting back to Nate's question, you have appointments between 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock for people to come and to meet the dog that you've pre-matched them with and to decide that they're going to take the dog or not, and then they leave with the dog.
Correct.
And do you have appointments for every dog that's there?
We have appointments for every dog that's there. We sometimes have backup.
Okay.
We might have, let's say, an appointment at 10 o'clock in the morning, but there are 2 or 3 other people that want that dog, and I will tell them, I have someone meeting that dog at 10 o'clock. Feel free to check back with me at noon. If they don't take the dog, we can see you in the afternoon.
So at the end of the day, how many dogs are left?
Sometimes none, sometimes one or two.
How many dogs are left?
Maybe 1 or 2.
And who picks those dogs up?
I'm not sure.
Who takes
them
those
from the
dogs from
massage?
that site, and where do they take them?
So for instance, we had one that went to a foster last week. We had one that required some medical treatment up here, and she's with me.
So they are delivered to your house?
Well, they go in my truck and I bring them back to the house.
Okay. Your truck? Always your truck?
Well, not necessarily. We have a van as well. The rescue owns a van.
Okay.
So it might be a volunteer.
So it's
that
either a
dri-
commercial vehicle or your private vehicle?
It's just a Dodge Caravan.
Is it yours? Do you own it? Or does the business own it?
No, I just said the rescue owns it.
Okay, so it's a
But
business,
it's
so that's a
not a
business
commer-
trip. So at 3 o'clock, so you have an appointment at 3. What time do you decide that somebody's not going to show up and that their dog's going to have to go somewhere else that evening?
Typically, we're closing down at the Masonic Hall by 4.
By 4 o'clock?
Excuse
Okay.
me.
Thank you.
But if our last appointment is 3, which is our cutoff,
Right.
at 3, we know no one else is coming, and then that dog goes back to the house.
Nate, did you have anything else about the transport days?
Not specifically about the day, I do have one other question.
Go ahead, then. I've got a number of questions.
Okay. My other question for you, Donna, at the moment is just, has the number of dogs that you have on average at your house, could you tell me what that number was before you made these changes and what it is now?
Upwards of 20 prior on a regular basis. Right now, I have 4.
Okay, thank you.
And I just want to say, and Matt and I had talked about this before, if, for instance, we have an adopter coming from Canada and we get a storm and they call me and say, I can't get there this afternoon, can I come get this dog in the morning? They come and get the dog in the morning.
And where do they come to get that dog?
They would come to my house.
Okay. And if they got there at 3:52, what would happen? Would you
They'd
turn them
come.
away, or would you go through with the adoption?
Well, they wouldn't, because they would
Recording
come,
stopped. Recording in progress.
they would come at they would come at a time that was within the agreed.
But there's a snowstorm,
They
and
probably-
they're delayed, or their car breaks down, and
Well, I think
whatever.
we could look at a million hypotheticals. Is someone
I'm
gonna come-
asking whether you would, at that point, say, no, I'm not supposed to be having people here after 4 o'clock.
Yes,
You'll have
I
to come back the
absolutely
next
would.
day, or do you have them adopt the dog?
No, I absolutely would and have said
Absolutely
that.
would not, okay. Thank you. There was a discussion earlier about a litter of puppies. Is that true? Did
I
you
have
know?
no idea what that was about.
Okay, thank you.
Have we had puppies?
So you don't have litters of puppies at your business?
We have had litters of puppies in past years,
Okay,
but we haven't had litters of puppies lately.
okay, thank you. This is concerning, in that we are having under oath contradictory testimony. So do you have more than one volunteer on site at a time, ever?
We have one volunteer that comes at each of those chore times. So
Do they overlap?
7 to 8 in the morning and 3 to 4 in the afternoon? No.
So you have one in the morning and one in the afternoon.
That's right.
Okay, thank you. Again, that's contradictory testimony from what we heard earlier.
But can I also tell you why that?
No, thank you. I've got a series of questions. I don't need you answering questions that I haven't asked. You had a chance to make a presentation earlier, and we let you have your say. So I'd like to ask my questions.
You did. When did you let me have my say? Did I miss something?
You spoke for quite a length of time. So, how late do the volunteers leave prior to 4 o'clock?
Yes.
Every time?
Yes.
Have you submitted a detailed plan showing how much of your property and your house is used? Staff, I have not seen that in any of my packets. The floor plan of her house that shows what percentage of her house is used for the business?
It's in the application that she submitted, which is in your packet. It's at the back of this memorandum.
Which one is it?
It wasn't in the original packet. I think it just went out today.
There's a packet that went out today.
It was an email.
The
an
email
attachment
today
on the
was
last email.
what Donna submitted. I think Belinda's pointing to the appellant's memorandum, which has a copy of the complete administrative permit.
Well, I have not seen that, and I apologize if I should have read that during my review ahead of time.
What is the percentage of your house that you claim on your taxes? That should answer.
I see a plan of a garage here, but it's not to scale.
Yeah, I mean,
And I do not see a plan of your house that shows how much your house is used, or shows me the entire size of your house, because without that, I cannot know whether you're exceeding the 25%.
I think that was
So
all
that's unfortunate that you've never submitted that.
Yes, I actually did submit that with the first permit, and I went over that with Matt and Emily.
I've not seen a detailed to-scale drawing, because without it being to scale, it's impossible to know what percentage of your house is being used.
If you know the measurement of the garage, which is all that's used, isn't...
So the answer is, I can't tell if the answer is yes or no.
what is the measurement
It's a
of your
yes/no
garage?
question.
Again, this is all in the first application. I want to say it's
I'd like to
16 by
see that.
20, but I didn't know I was going to have to
In
bring
the
that.
first application, you never gave
There
a
was
scale drawing.
not, there were no scale drawings in the
You
previous
had
application.
a hand drawing that said, this is the garage, and with no north-south, no measurements, no proper measurements, and then there was nothing that related to the house, so there was no way to relate what we were seeing in the garage to the total amount of the house.
So, again,
Is there a potential for a transport to arrive and you end up with 12 dogs that you have to bring home because nobody showed up?
No,
Never?
never. I feel like my answers are being second-guessed here. I don't understand. I'm trying to answer as honestly as I can, and I feel like there's
Never is a very
huffing and
absolute
questioning,
term.
and you're asking me a yes or no, and I'm saying no. There
okay,
has
thank you.
never been...
And I said thank you.
Never
We're
been
trying
a-
to understand the modified business plan, and what I was getting at is what redundancies do you have built in? What if There's a snowstorm. What if people don't show up? If
There
there are 20
act-
dogs coming, where are they gonna go?
So actually, this last transport, there was a snowstorm. It was scheduled for Saturday. We were watching the weather as the transporters do coming up because they need to make sure that their drivers are safe and the dogs are safe. So we were scheduled for Saturday, and on Friday afternoon, we bumped the transport to Sunday. I called John at the Masonic Hall, said, is it available on Sunday? And he said, absolutely, use it. If it had not been available, we would have canceled transport. It's an inconvenience, but it's not impossible to do, and we've done it before.
Okay.
I'm concerned that there's a lot of unenforceable conditions on this permit. How do we make sure that workers are gone by 4 o'clock? How do we make sure that dogs aren't delivered after 4 p.m.? How do we make sure that there are no adopters coming to the business that create additional trips to and from, or that require additional parking spaces above and beyond what are allowed by the permit? Those are the reasons I'm asking these questions. And I still don't have what I feel are good answers to those questions. I just, if something comes up, that's going to happen. At some point, your business outgrows your home, and you can run it as an office to your business, but at some point, the activities of it have to move somewhere else. I don't know where those limits are. I'm not somebody that's trained to make those kinds of determinations, but that's what we as this volunteer board have been asked to do, and that's what we're trying to do.
And
so we
that's-
need that information from you, and we need to ask you some difficult questions.
I understand, and that's why I'm trying to answer them, and that's why this was so scaled back, to address those issues.
I'm concerned that the adopters come to your house at all, because that's like a customer coming to a store to buy something. You have very little control over when they actually show up, or how many of them show up at a time, or that maybe 2 of them come at once.
No.
Or that they come in 2 cars. You have very little control over that. So I'm trying to figure out how we could even condition this such that we ensure compliance with the home business rules. So it's a very complex issue here.
I differ with you when you say that I have no control over it. I get that, everything is imperfect, nothing is in a box, but there are never 2 adopters that have shown up at the same time. There's never 2 adopters that
I
would.
appreciate you saying that, but
That's
you were
anecdotal
here,
by definition.
You were here and you heard absolutely contradictory testimony to several of your statements here tonight.
I don't understand how you could not have 2 showing up at the same time with deliveries of 20 dogs in a day
But he's asking 2 adopters at my house.
at your house.
Right.
Which has been in the past, but you're saying no
And
more.
I think that's the problem, is that I feel like we're skewing the past and now. The transports don't come to the house anymore. The adoptions aren't scheduled at the house. If someone doesn't make adoption day and they're going to pick up the next morning, that's when there would be an adopter at the house, but there would never be 2 of them in the same day.
So in other words, you have a doctor and a adoptee. So now you have 2 different groups of people at your house at the same time, right?
I don't understand your question.
What's an adoptee?
The person who's adopting the dog is there at the house, and they've got the doctor at the house supposedly doing their thing too, right?
Doctor?
No doctors. No doctors.
That's on.
Did I miss something?
No.
'Cause I didn't.
Nope, you're good. He just misinterpreted something.
Oh, as in a vet?
Yes.
Yeah, no, the vets are all in Texas. We have a vet techs at our vet office that foster dogs for us. So they might come and pick up a dog and take it to their home. What I do is foster dogs for the rescue. And there is nothing anywhere in Vermont law that governs the fostering of dogs. There just isn't, and it's in my paperwork. I
don't disagree with that one
Okay.
bit. And there are other things here I do agree with you. But
Have you moved your residential trash container yet, that you said you were gonna do for the application?
So I was given 6 months to
Okay.
create a parking space and to move the trash container, which is frozen to the ground. And it is my intent to move it as soon as weather permits.
And you carry liability insurance in case the dogs that your volunteers are walking, injure anyone in the neighborhood, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And how are your volunteers covered in case they're injured?
They are covered under our liability policy and our director and officer policy.
Okay, other questions? Are you satisfied, John?
no,
I-
I'm not satisfied from anybody.
I know you're not satisfied. Do you have any other questions?
I don't. I
Okay.
think we're good.
Can I say can I say something before? I mean, I would hope that the board would look at all of what I submitted, because unlike the appellants who have counsel representing them because they can afford it, I do not. So I didn't come with a polished statement that I could read to you, but I did present it. And I think it's solid, and I think it answers a lot of questions. And I feel like if a decision is made before that paperwork, which is based on law, is looked at, that it's not a fair decision. And I think either way this goes, it's going to get appealed to the environmental court anyway. And why do we have to do that again?
Donna, I got a question for you. So the document that you submitted today and staff distributed to the DRB, is it your testimony that you produced that document solely?
I produced that document with some supervision from my law professors, but I produced that document.
Okay, thank you.
And I'm still not clear on which document to which she refers.
That was a document,
that was
that Emily emailed to us today.
Read that before I got here tonight.
It was emailed.
I work all day, I have a busy job. I looked at this over the weekend. I think submitting this the day of the hearing is almost unconscionable and not helpful.
I agree. I also did not read it other than scan it, and it was pretty clear that an attorney was involved in the crafting of that document.
I'm a retired paralegal and legal assistant. So I am not an attorney as Mr. Hall is, but I have some legal training, and I certainly have written hundreds of memorandums, and I have attorneys that I confer with. But I don't know why that would be an issue. If it's solid and it's based on law, would it matter if my dog wrote it? I mean, honestly.
No, it doesn't, only that you did claim a moment ago that you couldn't compete with the attorneys and the legal preparation that was given by the appellants, and yet.
I don't have an attorney representing me is what I meant.
Right. But
We don't
regardless,
have an attorney representing us.
I
I
think-
did the absolute best that I could.
understood, and I think that staff here actually did a very nice job of framing the 3 or 4 key issues that are at play here. I think there have been 1 or 2 that have come up during the testimony tonight, and again, I keep going back to this, is I've heard differing views on the exact same subject and differing testimony. So whether there's never more than one volunteer on site at a time, or whether there's 2 or 3 twice a day, I really don't know how to take that.
So there are two,
And how should we decide who's
there's two
telling the truth and
volunteers sitting
who's
here that could
not?
answer questions.
So I guess we're just gonna have to go on and try to make the best decision we can.
This is gonna end up in court.
Yep, we, that's a good segue. So at this point, I'd like to offer an opportunity to the appellants for any closing remarks. And I am going to ask for public input before we close. So if you are in the audience or participating by Zoom and you've got something to say, don't worry, you will have your opportunity.
I don't want to spend a lot of time. I have a series of pictures here. I don't know how many copies I have. They're dated. I'm involving observations of people at the site, employees, workers, adopters coming to the site within the last couple of weeks. You have to go through it and look at the captions and the date and the timing of it. You can see the activities. This is by no means everything that we've seen. It's just what happened to catch on film. If we want to talk about puppies, whoever's got a computer who wants to go on the website and look at the website for the rescue, you can see the puppies there. You can see the people coming to the site. That's also dated. So in terms of the accuracy of what we're saying is we're testifying as to what we've seen. I'm also looking at a recent observation of cars at the dog rescue, a dog-related business. This is just offhand kept by the neighbors and accumulated. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 instances between January 23rd and March 12th of workers or cars or people at the rescue during the peak hour.
I think one of the questions that came up was, she said we couldn't know what's going on. Well, every one of you lives in a neighborhood, every one of you sits somewhere, you know what your neighbor's cars are, you know the cars that frequent the neighborhood. Well, she's at a key spot in the neighborhood where you go in and out every day. We know the regular cars that come there for the workers and those that don't. We have a pretty good handle on the difference. You'll also notice that one of those pictures is actually one of the neighbor's driveway with an adopter showing up with a leash in their hand and then went immediately from that house after it set off the camera, went over to hers to get a dog. So, and it is after peak time. So, you all know what's right in your neighborhood and what's not, what it looks like, what it doesn't look like. We see it every day. So we know who's coming. We know that between that 7 and 8 and that 3 and 4-ish, sometimes later, we know whose cars are what. We know who's workers. It's clear what the other people are doing there. I mean, she's at a key spot in the neighborhood. We all drive in and out. I drive out every morning to take my daughter to work at that time when they start and come back. My daughter has to be to work at 7. I am in and out of there right at that time every day. So, yeah, I see exactly what goes on. And it's not hard to tell. It's the same handful of cars every day, 7 days a week. And I'm in and out a lot. I'm retired, so I'm around all the time. So.
Now, again, we're looking at the magnitude of the impact on the activities external to the dwelling as having the impact on us and not being allowed under the ordinance. These are not minimal things. These are significant things that happen on a frequent basis. Whether it be, like John said, people coming like customers to the property, that's not internal to the dwelling. People coming and walking around the neighborhood with dogs, sometimes up to 4, 5, or 6 dogs walking through the neighborhood. Dogs that are new to Vermont that came from somewhere else. It isn't your neighbor's dog that you've been seeing forever. It's a dog that's rescued. It's been coming from another space. You don't know its history. You can insure it, but that's not going to help somebody if it turns around and nips somebody. I mean, these are
You
activities.
can't know that for any dog.
You can't know that for any dog. But
And someone else can get a new dog any day, and
Yeah.
it's the exact same situation, so I'm afraid that doesn't hold much water.
well, I'm going to stick with it, if you mind.
Go ahead, but I'm gonna disagree with you, just like I disagree with her.
Then, that's fine. With the notion of the people are bringing in new dogs week after week after week after week into the neighborhood, just the mere possibilities lend in favor of concerns. And it is different than anything else that's going on in the neighborhood. And again, we get to this, I keep coming back to the same thing. It's outside activity that is curtailed by the ordinance. And are they going to create an exception for the circumstances to make
The
it?
exception would be not allowing her to walk a dog in the neighborhood. I can bring my dog over to your neighborhood and walk it. And you can't, I mean, people come to my neighborhood. People come to my neighborhood to trick or treat. My God, they come from miles and miles around. We don't call it a nuisance and tell them they can't come.
We're looking at something that's associated with an occupation within the residential neighborhood. We're not talking about somebody walking the dog somewhere else.
Walking
If there was a
dog
condition.
is a perfectly legitimate activity, regardless of who owns it and who's walking.
With regard to the condition you just mentioned, if you put a condition on the permit that says they can't walk in the neighborhood or they can't have the dogs outside the home, and that everything was happening off-site on a remote site, we'd be having a different conversation here.
And whatever we voted on at that point, that would be overturned by state law.
What do you voted? In which way?
We're mandating
Let's not,
something, we're
let's
mandating something
let's not
that's
do a
not
hy,
legal.
let's not do a hypothetical, Paul, please.
I mean, it may be, you know, this, we don't know where this is gonna go, we're gonna pursue it. We're trying to do the best we can with regard to the evidence and make it accurate and on point. I will disagree from a legal standpoint, that walking a dog in the neighborhood associated with this business is an entire different animal under zoning than some person walking their dog through the neighborhood who lives there or just happened to be visiting. We can agree to disagree on that, but.
Okay, anything else? Mark? Okay, thank you. Okay, members of the audience, or members participating by Zoom, anybody have any questions or comments? If so, please come to the front table and identify yourself, your name and address. Welcome.
Hi, my name is Chad Eccleston, and I volunteer with Vermont English Bulldog Rescue. The rental van, which I heard referred to before as being at Donna's residence, I drive that U-Haul. It never goes to her house since the time that I've been involved there, which is since November. That is either picked up at U-Haul or it stays at the hall, the Masonic Hall, or it goes to storage, which again is not Donna's residence. So I'm not sure where that accusation is coming from. I have brought dogs, I've walked a dog as allowed in the back in Donna's yard. The only dog I ever hear barking is her neighbors to the right, and I hear those dogs barking regularly. And I'm always wondering, why is it that the accusations are made against her and her residence when that has not been my experience at all? Yes.
Question.
Yeah.
So you're saying that all the cages and everything that you set up over at the Masonic Hall are stored elsewhere?
They are stored in her storage.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's not on the property, it's at another location.
It is in a personal storage, correct?
Okay.
Rental storage site. Yeah. I guess that's most of what I had to say here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
My name is Mike Olson. I have a question for you. Wasn't it a couple of weeks ago that I walked by?
Pete,
No,
hold on.
Address the board, please.
Yeah, I'm
And,
sorry, you need, I'm gonna step in for Pete for a second since he's not sitting right here, but you need to address
All right.
the board.
Address for the
I don't
record.
remember the exact date. I didn't write it down. It was a nice day out. I took our two dogs, one of which was very familiar to the volunteer, and he came out in the middle of the street. Everybody is friendly. I mean, I don't have any problem talking to anybody, but both dogs were there. He was out there. It was after 4, and there was another person. I don't know if it was a volunteer or not. It wasn't Donna. And we talked out in the street for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes. So that's just an instance, just to say things aren't clear cut, I guess is all I'm trying to say here. Things happen, and it's impossible to draw absolutes around what's going to happen or not, given the high variability of the neighborhood, the events, dogs, people. Things are going to happen, and that's the only point. It's not absolutely controlled at all.
And before you go, we need you to state your address.
403 White Birch Lane.
And did you get his name, Emily?
Mike Olson.
Michael, yeah, Michael Olson. Right.
Good, good.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any other members of the public who would like to address the board?
Can we have a request for a second appearance, Pete?
Okay.
It's allowed. We like to make sure everyone has a chance to speak before we have people do double dips, but it looks like that you go right ahead.
And I will follow protocol here and address the board here. In reference to the previous gentleman, I was showing up when another volunteer had been leaving. Whether you want to call that, I pulled in and I saw his dog Bandit, who I love, who I remember that dog being adopted there from there before. That was 5 minutes. Sure. I mean, you want to cite me for saying hi to a dog that I really cared about. It's a great dog. And that was in terms of multiple volunteers being there. There was another volunteer who was leaving at that time. So if you want to nail that for technicality, that is up to your discretion. But I would say, I would count that as a single volunteer there at the time, as one was leaving and I was entering. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Next, public testimony.
Okay, we've got somebody coming.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Jessica Wood. I live at 189 West Street, Essex Junction. I am a volunteer with the rescue. I kind of wanted to clarify with when people come to adopt after the adoption events. The reason we know what time they're coming is we schedule people to specific times and we communicate with them throughout the day. So if we know they're going to be pushing close, that's when Donna would reschedule them. That's how we know what time they're showing up. It's all based on adoption slots. So that I just wanted to make sure that was clarified.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's helpful.
Name and address for a record, please.
Stephanie Bliss, 285 Lamplite Lane, in Williston. I wanted to point out that there have been many occasions where Dawn has exaggerated the truth, and I can attest to that because what she says here is not necessarily what's actually going on. If you look at her Facebook page for the rescue, she told you that she hasn't had puppies for a long time. She had puppies on December 29th. On January 19th, she had a litter of puppies. On February 5th, she had a litter of German Shepherd puppies, 3 months old. These are all, and she said she didn't have them. That's kind of par for the course. She has a thing about writing all this stuff down and writing people letters and vile letters that get a little unhinged sometimes. She also said that they don't adopt after 4 o'clock, but there's photographic evidence on her Facebook page of people in her home, and it's dark outside. And even in the darkest part of winter, it doesn't get dark until after 4. So I'd just like to point out that often a lot of what is said needs to be taken with a little bit of a grain of salt. So that's what I have to say. but you can look it up right on Facebook.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who would like to address the board?
Don is requested to. No one else is.
Okay. Thank you, John, for your assistance. I don't have visibility into that.
All right, so come on up, Donna.
So I just wanted to address that specifically, sort of two pieces of it. There have been, I'm going to say, more than 50, 100 incidences where in the past our volunteers have been walking dogs on the public thruway, and Mrs. Bliss has stopped her car, jumped out, run over to our dogs, hugging, kissing, sitting on the ground with them. I wish I could adopt them all. So there's this piece. What I say on my Facebook page, I wonder why they're stalking the Facebook page, because if I didn't like someone or like what they did, I would not be looking at their Facebook page, seeing what time of night it is and what room of your house a picture is taken in and how do you know who they are. I post hundreds of pictures on our Facebook page, in my house, in other people's houses, in the garage, at the Masonic Center. Do they know? I just wonder if anybody is seeing the scope of like how blown out this has gotten. One of the first questions was, to Bliss was, if they corrected the parking, would you be satisfied? The overwhelming answer to that is no, because we would be right back here talking about something else. We're talking about what goes on in my living room. I mean, seriously, are you people hearing this? I have cameras on my house. They're talking about watching my Facebook page, who goes in and out, checking license plate numbers, taking pictures. This is not just about a dog rescue. This is about...
Donna, if I really appreciate everything that you're saying, but what we are charged with is this a compliant use with the regulations or not?
I understand.
And did the zoning administrator issue a zoning permit appropriately? And so the stuff about what people are doing and looking in your home and reading Facebook posts and et cetera is, my appetite for listening to that has vaporized.
Okay, but if you're going to listen to it from their side, I want to at least be able to counter it. I don't like it either.
It's social media, which means it's public available.
You're assuming that what she's telling you is the truth.
Right. And
We're just going to take it all in and look at what has been submitted for evidence and draw some conclusions. Is there another? The young woman, you raised your hand. Do you have testimony, please?
Yes. Hi, this is Cindy Cox from San Antonio. My transport company delivers dogs to Williston for Donna about once a month. I'd like to address the comment from the lady regarding puppies because I understand both this side of the puppies being brought to Vermont and that every single one of them are adopted as soon as they arrive there. So, I mean, I guess the question would be, does she have litters of puppies? Are litters of puppies delivered to Williston to be adopted out through Vermont English Bulldog Rescue? Yes. Are those puppies at our house? No. And that's a pretty important difference. My drivers we are very conscientious. I work with the fosters on this side, as well as with Donna and her volunteer on those side, to make sure that every dog or puppy that is delivered is healthy, has every single bit of paperwork, vaccinations, spayed or neutered, all those things that are required for a dog to be healthy per Vermont requirements. We are meticulous about this, as are Donna and her staff and her volunteers. We work really, really hard, and we were glad to help reduce the amount of stress in the neighborhood by changing up when the venue was changing. We were glad to help with making that possible to hopefully take away some of that tension that happened when our drivers would deliver those dogs. I mean, we try to do it as quickly and quietly as possible, but it's pretty difficult with the number of people that are required to take care of those dogs. So I can speak to the health of the dogs. I can speak to the efficiency and efficacy of Donna and her volunteers, both when she was doing things at her house, but now especially that they're doing them at the Masonic Hall. I can speak to the cleanliness and the health that the dogs are delivered in. And I'd be happy to answer any other questions in those ways, but I just wanted to make sure that you had someone who had some real knowledge of both sides of the process.
Can you speak to where the puppies came from?
I can't. Well, there's a variety. You know, of course, I'm sorry. Once again, please, that last part.
Mill?
Oh, no. No, we do not support puppy mills. You might be aware that in Texas and a lot of other places, there is just an overabundance of dogs, unfortunately, puppies. These puppies come from a variety of situations. For the most part here, there are unwanted puppies, people who do not spay or neuter their animals. They end up with puppies. And Donna works with these fosters because she's a great rescue to work with, and works with them and the people who are fostering them here in Texas to get them spayed, neutered, all the applicable vaccinations, any tests that might be required, et cetera, to make sure they're healthy before they go on transport. But no, we do not work with puppy mills here.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining. Could you state the name of your company again, please?
Sure. Veterans Pet Rescue Express.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cindy. Okay.
So Pete,
the young
we've
woman
got
at
somebody
the
else at the table here to.
yes, at the table. Could you please state your name and your address, please?
Yes, my name is Sanala Barich, and I live at 192 Lamplite Lane, which is right next door to the property.
Great. What's your commentary or comments?
So I am the property owner of the property right next door, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the concern that I have about my property value with a business such as a dog rescue being approved right next door. As it pertains to the noise and traffic, parking, I think that most of it has already been stated. But when it comes to my home value, I'm concerned that if all of these neighbors are concerned about a dog rescue in the neighborhood, potential buyers of my home, if I was to sell it, would be as well.
And
okay, thank you.
For the record,
anything else?
When you bought your home, you were not aware of this because there was no permit, correct?
When I bought my home, it was in 2015, and there was not as much activity going on as there is today.
As there is today, or as there was
Or
in
as
the
there
fall?
was before we had the last hearing.
So I would just, I really appreciate what you're saying, and I'm not trying to minimize it. It's real, but the DRB is judging compliance of a home business, and it doesn't extend into the topic that you're bringing forth.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other members of the public who would like to address the board?
Is there anybody online?
Yeah, there's
Christina.
Christina.
So Pete, there's somebody online.
Okay.
Bring them on.
Christina, could you please state your name and address for the record, please?
Christina, you're still muted.
Emily, do you have the
I've
power
pressing the
to
ask to
unmute.
unmute button. Christina, you're still on mute on the bottom of your toolbar. Click the microphone symbol with the red dash through it.
Maybe.
Okay, while Christina works on that, are there any other members of the public that would like to address the board?
No raised hands in the room, Pete.
Okay. Give a few more seconds to Christina.
Can she type it in chat?
Christina, you can also type in the chat.
Maybe she's not there.
Oh, I think she's rejoining from the waiting room. Hi, Christina, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. A little phone issue. My name is Christina Hamlin. I live at 5 Pinewood Drive in Essex, and I was one of Donna's volunteers. I haven't done it in the last year or so, just for personal reasons, but I have been to her new location where she's receiving dogs and seen the way she receives them in. I have previous time before she made the changes, I had been a volunteer over on site, and some of the things that have been said right along about noise and stuff are very wrong. The dogs would only bark if somebody knocked on the door to the room that they were in, or a very rare bark. Volunteers were told that they had strict rules about what they were allowed to do when they were walking through a neighborhood, where the poop bags were to be put, how to clean up after the dogs, to let her know if they were sick. Like, there was very strict rules around everything. And Donna's been making a lot of changes in order to make this all work out. And she saved a lot of dogs. And I want to show the support for her, because I also am one of the ones that co-parent adopted one of the dogs from there. And she makes sure the dogs are healthy when they come up. And if anything comes up while they're here, she immediately gets them to the vets. And she works 24/7 on her own to make sure that dogs are cared for, regardless on if it's a business thing or just taking them over to make sure they're healthy.
Thank you, Christina. Appreciate it. Okay, is there any other members of the public who would like to address the board? No raised hands, staff?
Donna has her hand raised.
I just wanted to say.
Okay, Donna, please make it quick.
I just wanted to say that included in the packet of information. Because I wanted the neighbors to know that I do hear their concerns, I requested from 3 different real estate agents a comp listing on the properties in our neighborhood, because I wanted to know if that was a valid concern. I know you're saying that it's a non-issue, but it's a personal issue to me. And so included in my packet are comps from 3 real estate agents. They were all done within the last 6 months, and they show that not only have the properties not declined in value, they have almost doubled in value. That's all.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to close Appeal 23-01 at 9:02. Thank you all for participating. Okay, so the DRB is going to go into deliberative session. Members of the audience who are present in the room, if you would please vacate, and anyone participating by Zoom will be put into the waiting room. And when we come out of deliberative session, if you are still participating by Zoom, Emily will let you in from the waiting room, and those that are there in person are welcome to wait out in the hallway and come back in when we're done deliberative session, or you can call planning and zoning in the morning for our decision. Are we live now? I've lost it.
Yes, you're good.
Okay. Okay. Welcome to the Town of Williston Development Review Board for Tuesday, March 14th, 2023. We are out of deliberative session. Is there a motion for Appeal 23-01?
Yes, as authorized by WDB 5.4.6, I, David Turner, move the Williston Development Review Board, having reviewed the appeal of the administrator's decision and all accompanying materials, and having heard and duly considered the testimony presented on the public hearing of March 14th, 2023, propose new findings of facts and conclusions of law for AP 23-01 and appeal the notice of the zoning violation and overturn the decision of the administrator to issue AP 23-0121 with new findings of facts and conclusions of law as written below. The new finding of fact is the dog rescue home business uses the backyard to exercise the rescue dog. This is deemed a material part of the home business as considered an outdoor workplace or workspace. New conclusions of law. Per WDB Appendix G,